Despite appearances, these two buildings are not the same. Oh, sure, they kind of look the same, and we tell ourselves that these are both two-story mixed-use buildings that are up against the sidewalk and don't prioritize cars, so that therefore they'll automatically create a welcoming atmosphere. And that alone will create a dynamic, fun, and interesting place where you and your friends and neighbors will live, work, hang out, shop, and eat. And that developers can simply recreate this physical form, which naturally recreates all the benefits of old-time main streets. But are they really the same? Do they function the same way? Well, I've got some bad news for you. No, they're not the same. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and let me tell you how they're different, why they're different, and how that difference explains why new mixed-use buildings often don't recreate the public spaces we're hoping to enjoy. We all want better urban spaces. Nobody wants to walk past an empty parking lot or a big box building. So what can we do about it? Part 1. Introduction. Everyone agrees that 1970s-style, treeless, car-focused big box stores with blank walls and a sea of parking is detrimental to modern urban planning, walkability in neighborhoods. It results in a boring landscape and places you don't want to walk next to, much less hang around in. Urbanists like to talk about mixed-use buildings with retail on the first level right up against the sidewalk. But when a developer creates such a building, we're left with the uneasy inevitability that the new ones just aren't the same. To fix them, at first they said they needed to have more variety in how they look. Then they said they needed more transparency. And all of that is good, although maybe not necessary, but it's not sufficient. There's one big thing that no one is talking about, and trust me, it's on purpose. Part 2. Walk the block. Let's have a walk along two sides of the same street at the border between a medium-sized city and a first-ring suburb. In the first case, we're walking along a block with a newer building with retail on the ground floor and residential above. In the second case, we're walking along a block with older buildings with retail on the ground floor and residential or commercial above. Do you notice anything different? It's not a design difference that's important. They're both two stories with retail on the first floor and office or residential on the second, with a decent amount of glass and transparency. But what you will notice is that the newer building tends to have larger businesses that are often national or regional chains. And the older buildings have smaller spaces with smaller stores, mostly one-off shops that are locally owned or occasionally a regional chain. You'll see this pattern over and over again, comparing newer blocks to older blocks. So why is that? What causes this? Part 3. Lots of property. Here, let me give you a hint about what I'm talking about. Let's take a look at the county property map that shows taxable parcels. There it is. The newer development is on the left, the older one on the right. Notice anything that jumps out at you? Here's a clue. How many lines and boxes are on the left compared to the right? What does that tell you about lot ownership, about concentration of ownership? Clearly, the block on the left is just one gigantic building that takes up the entire block. The block on the right is a multitude of small buildings. Now, each lot and building doesn't necessarily have a different owner, but that's usually the case unless the block is getting bought up for redevelopment. Sometimes a property and building owner may own one or two other buildings. Part 4. Diversity. We talk about human diversity when we talk about equitable neighborhoods. But what about business diversity? Doesn't that also encourage equity? If all the businesses are national chains, they're probably owned by people from out of state, probably mostly white. Decisions are made elsewhere. There's less incentive for business owners to invest in the neighborhood, to make the store fit into your unique neighborhood. You used to see this in malls, where if you went to one mall, you pretty much knew what every mall was going to look like, and which stores would be there. In some sense, malls were even worse because that single owner owned a whole commercial district, not just a block or half a block. Today we're seeing the same thing on a somewhat smaller scale, with every 5/1 with retail on the first floor being a full block and with a single owner. So how does that affect the experience walking down the block, shopping or dining or running errands? Well, you're just going to have a lot more destinations when you have smaller buildings, filled with more small, locally owned shops. A greater tendency for business owners to live in your region, if not your city or even your neighborhood. A greater likelihood that the shops will meet the needs of you and your neighbors. A greater likelihood that the block will have unique character that distinguishes it from other blocks and neighborhoods. Way back in 1962, before even I was born, Jane Jacobs talked about this. In her seminal book, Life and Death of Great American Cities, she talks about building age. A brand new building will have expensive rents, but as it ages, those rents will generally be lower than those of newer buildings around it. This brings more variety to a block in a neighborhood because you can have businesses and owners that can afford different rents, so you get a variety of storefronts. Because of that, someone can start a small business on a big budget or a small one, leading to a greater diversity of buildings and owners, and thus allowing more kinds of people, age, race, religion, etc., to start a small business and generate familial and generational wealth. Part 5. Conclusion and Call to Action. It's not how it looks, it's who owns it. It's about granularity of ownership. So what can we do about that? Talk or write to your city council and your planning commission. Ask them why there's a growing chorus of not wanting giant corporate entities such as Wall Street companies and private equity firms from buying up single-family homes, but there's no equivalent complaint about large corporations owning apartments and other mixed-use buildings that are a block long. When large suburban office parks and office buildings with a sea of parking are redeveloped, which is a good thing, when they're redeveloped with more density, why don't we require the land to be broken up into separate parcels? Why don't we have single-family business buildings the way we have single-family homes? And why are minorities excluded from owning them, which drives familial wealth building? I've seen two ways of doing this. One is by literally having different stores with different buildings that are owned by different people. The second way is by having a single building but having business condos, kind of like regular, housing condos, but just for businesses. And there are pros and cons to each way. What do you think of this concentration of ownership? Is it good? Is it bad? Is there anything we can do about it? What are you doing in your city? Let us know in the comments and we can have a good discussion about it. Thanks for watching, and keep building great neighborhoods. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you want to know when I come out with new videos.